Hello and welcome to episode 27 of Stitched in Sweden. I'm Maria, your host, and you can find me on Ravelry and Instagram as mmonska. The show notes can be found at stitchedinsweden.blogspot.com, and our Ravelry group is Stitched in Sweden. This week I'm going to talk to you a little bit about this week in Stockholm, some projects I've been working on, one finished object, a technique tip, kind of follow-up from last week, and a sort of longer, maybe, questions and answers section from some questions that came in this week. Let's see, and then I'll have some upcoming news, I guess. So, getting started, this week in Stockholm has been another sunny week, so summer is definitely here, and it's a late one, but pretty warm and nice. So that's lovely. It's sort of my last week before school starts, and actually this week I will be going to Introduction for New Students on Thursday and Friday. So that's exciting and nerve-wracking a little bit at the same time. But we have some other stuff, I won't go into the details, but some work that needs to be done in the apartment this week, so we will be out of the house on Wednesday night. I have to start school on Thursday, so not too excited for that, but hopefully that will all go smoothly and we will be back in our apartment next week. So this week in Stockholm, we just got back from the summer house yesterday. We were there from Friday. We left Friday morning, and we just got back Sunday evening. And we were there with most of Thomas's family, including his young niece and nephew. So that was a lot of fun, and there was a lot of relaxing time, some knitting time for me. We watched the first Harry Potter movie, which I haven't seen in a really long time, and I always enjoy that. Especially, for some reason, I always like to watch or read Harry Potter when I'm returning to school. So it's a good fall and winter movie and book, I think. So we spent a lot of time just hanging out and enjoying the nice weather, cooking some delicious food, and I spent probably a good 2 hours yesterday picking blueberries because they were everywhere, and you could definitely tell that the bushes themselves were drying out a bit this time, but the berries were huge, and there were so many of them. There's no way that you could ever pick them all. I think it would take days to pick them all. And this time, actually, there was also lingonberries, which are little red berries that are pretty tart and kind of bitter, but they are made into lingonsylt, which is like lingonberry jam. That's a common Swedish thing to have with potatoes and meatballs, or on with other things too, but so lots and lots of lingonberries, which we didn't see last time. So Thomas's mom picked a bunch of those, and I think she'll be making some jam or something. And then what else was there? Oh, a lot of, I think it's heather this time. I picked just a little bit of it and pressed it. I didn't really have anything with me to press it, so I only had this notebook, which I showed you last week. Let me see if I can find it now. I just got a couple little stems of it, and maybe you can see it. Really pretty purple flower, and it was just everywhere this time, and it wasn't in bloom before. So this is the first we've seen of it, and it's really pretty. These tiny little flowers, and they're just everywhere. So it's been fun to go there more this summer and sort of see the progression of what's growing. We also, actually, Thomas's mom found some chanterelle mushrooms, and so we had those on some hard bread. You don't have it in the US, I don't think. It's kind of like a cracker, but it's not. So we had that for sort of an after dinner snack with the mushrooms fried in some butter, really good. But it's been a little bit drier where the mushrooms usually grow, so because I think they did some redoing of the drainage, so there wasn't so much water, and then hopefully not as many mosquitoes, but it also means maybe not so many mushrooms. But we found some anyway, and they were delicious. So I think that's about all that happened at the summer house. I did a bit of knitting, which I'll show you in a little bit. But otherwise this week, before we went to the summer house, I got to spend an hour in the evening, I think on Thursday, doing a little photo shoot with one of my knitting friends from the Stockholm Night Knitters, and she was taking pictures of me with all my new patterns that are coming out very soon. So that is really exciting, and I can't wait to see them. I just got a little peek on the back of her camera for a couple of the designs, and they were looking really great. So I hope that by the time you are watching this, perhaps Meristem, my mitten pattern, has been released. If not, it will be very soon, and I will be sure to announce it on Instagram when that happens. So, yeah, so let's get started with what I've been working on this week. Last week in the mail, actually, I got 2 project bags from Deb at Fondant Fiber, and I'll just show you those which have been holding my works in progress this week. I got this one, which is the, I think, smaller size, has her label there, handmade by Deb, fondantfiber.com, and the little zipper pull, which is lovely. And these ones just have a nice plain lining so that you can really see your project. I have a little bag of lavender in there right now. No project in here, in this one, but I also have the larger bag. These came as a set. Here's the bigger one, and this is holding my sweater project. This is definitely a sweater size bag with plenty of room for other things. So this is what I took with me to the summer house. I have my Cybella pullover in here, which I was working on last week, and I had showed you the sleeves. This is the first sleeve, which was finished last week, and I have now, my stitch markers are what's making noise in there. I have now finished the second sleeve. Here it is. Looks pretty much exactly the same as the first sleeve, hopefully. Maybe this week it's a little bit less sunny, so perhaps you can get a little better stitch definition. It's still pretty bright for that white, but maybe you can see a little bit better the tubular cast on. Anyway, I finished up that second sleeve this week, and I started the body. So I did do the tubular cast on for the body, which did take quite a while because it was over a lot more stitches than just for the cuff of the sleeve, but again, I think it's totally worth it because it just makes a really nicely finished edge. So this pullover is worked from the bottom up, so you can see what I have so far. I am just working on a little bit of waist shaping right now. I am not doing the same waist shaping that is in the pattern, because the pattern has it does have shaping in the pattern, and it's written for shaping along the sides of the sweater. And I prefer to have the shaping along points, 4 points around the sweater rather than 2 points on either side. So I decrease, when I'm doing the waist shaping, from the bottom up to the waist, I will be decreasing stitches, and then at the waist I'll knit straight for a little while, and then I do some more increases up for the bust, attach the arms, attach the sleeves, and then do the yoke. So a couple of people had asked how, to go into a little bit more detail about how I do shaping for sweaters, especially with short rows. And if you remember last week, I had mentioned that I wanted to have the back longer than the front of the sweater. And I started knitting this, and I decided I actually wanted to have them the same. So I'm not going to do the short rows that I had mentioned for the lowering the back, but I still will make the back longer than the front, because especially for yoked sweaters, which means that a yoked sweater is one that has like the round construction on the neck, not set in sleeves. For a yoked sweater, I prefer to have the back longer than the front so that the front doesn't ride up on my neck. And the way you can do that is to do it with short rows. So you can add more fabric to the back of your sweater by knitting short rows on the back, and so you have more rows worked on the back than you do on the front. It's a little bit tricky to explain, but basically I'm not going to do them yet because I'm going to do them up near the shoulders, where if you actually look at a profile of your body, your back is longer than your front, or for some people it is. For me it is. So I'll talk a little bit more about that when I get up to that point. But basically when you work a short row, like if this part facing you was the back, I would work across here, and then I would wrap and turn, or do my twin stitch short row stitch, turn back and work back across the same way, and then work back around, and then continue around the rest of the sweater to add in a couple of extra rows. You could keep doing that as many times as you want to add fabric in the width, or in the height, I guess, of the sweater. That wasn't very clear, but I will explain it a little bit more when I get up to the part where I'm adding the short rows. I am planning on drawing out some diagrams that can hopefully help explain that a little bit better. But you can see here, this is actually the front of the sweater, and oh, actually no, it's the back. And I know that because right here and here I have my markers which show me where I'm doing the decreases for the waist shaping. And on the front of the sweater, they are here and here, slightly wider out. So where I decide to place those is for the back. I do the back stitches divided by 3, and then I place the markers so that it's divided into 3 sections. 1, 2, 3. And then I decrease along these points here, or increase once I get past the waist. And then on the front of the sweater, I divide the sweater into 4, so you have a quarter on the side, quarter on each side, and then half of the stitches in the middle part. And that just makes it so the lines where you're doing the decreases are slightly more towards the side, so that they're not like pointing directly to your bust. And in the back, you want to have them a little bit, or I like having them a little bit more in the center, just as a personal preference. The reason why I like to do the waist shaping in the middle of the sweater rather than directly on the either side is because when you do all the decreases and increases directly on the side of the fabric, basically what you're doing is getting a flat finished object. So that your fabric is basically, will just have the shape of whatever your body is, but you will be able to lie that fabric totally flat. And my body isn't flat. I'm sure nobody's body is flat because you're not flat like paper. And if you move the decreases and increases to more of the middle of your body, then you can actually like create a form, which helps the sweater fit better. If you've ever done any sewing, it's similar to making darts. So you can think of the increases and decreases as where you would be placing a dart in a sewn garment. You don't just do, for sewing, you don't just do waist shaping on the sides, you also often do darts in the middle along these lines and in the back on the same lines. And that gives you a finished object that has shape to it and fits on a body, which is the goal, right? So you can see, I've been holding this up forever now, that I have knit about, 7 inches or so on the body, and I hope to do a bit more of that this week and maybe even attach the sleeves, so we'll just see. But that is mostly what I have been working on this week. I also was knitting on Mina86 of the Knitting Expat podcast. I was knitting on her new hat pattern, which doesn't have a name yet, or she has a name, but she is not sharing the name yet. I was test knitting that pattern for her, and it is a lovely pattern. I was really loving the way that it was knitting up. I was knitting on the large size, and I should have been knitting on the small size, given the yarn that I was using. I was using this Brooklyn Tweed Loft, and I believe this is the Button Jar colorway, which is a woolen spun yarn, so it's very loft, and has a lot of air in the yarn, and it's not like a really compressed yarn like a worsted spun yarn would be. But this is not a very stretchy yarn in the knitted fabric, and my hat came out too big. And I think it was just my yarn choice. Mina said she used a really bouncy, springy yarn, and I think that when I knit this again, I would like to also try that because I think that that would come out better. But her pattern is lovely. You should check it out. She'll be releasing it soon, I think. And it has a leaf motif that goes kind of up the hat, I guess, but it's gradual, sort of. I don't really know how to describe it, but I wish I still had the hat to show you, but it was just too big. So I'm hoping to cast that on again, but it will be in a different yarn. Those were my two works in progress this week. And I do have one finished object, which I showed you at the beginning of last week and was talking a little bit about. This is a smaller version of my new shawl pattern that will be coming out soon. It's being test knit right now. Here's some detail of it and the edge. Last time I had knit and unknit part of it. That's a little bit more of a true color. It's a pretty dark gray with some lighter grays and almost blues mixed in there too as well. This particular size has 3 repeats, and the large one that I showed last week, I think it was, or the week before, which was light blue, has 6 repeats, and this pattern I decided in the end will have instructions for how to adjust the size of the shawl, but it won't have specific instructions for size small and size large. It will just tell you what part you can repeat as many times as you want to get whatever size you want. So I finished that this week on Wednesday, just before the little photo shoot session that I had, so I was able to bring this, and that was my goal, so that was really nice. But this used just about 75 grams of a fingering weight yarn, a sock yarn, and I could have probably gotten four repeats out of it. I probably would have had to bind off in a different color then, and since I wanted to see what size shawl you would get using just a single skein of sock yarn, I decided to rip back and just do the 3 repeats for that one. So yes, that is what I finished this week. And so now for the technique tip, I wanted to do a little continuation from last week, and that was with the tubular cast on. Right after I podcasted last week, I was looking over on the Twist Collective website, and I noticed that they had posted an article about tubular cast on. So it was perfect, and it's a really well done article, I think, that has really clear images and a nice explanation of how the tubular cast on works, as well as 3 different ways of achieving the same result, or a really similar result. So they have some diagrams in the beginning that's called the anatomy of the tubular cast on, and they use different color yarns to kind of show you how the tubular cast on comes together and what parts of it become which parts in the end, with the edge that gives you that nice rounded edge that really does make a nice finished look to your knitted garments and makes them look more like, have more of a similar finishing to store-bought knitted garments. So the first part is the anatomy of the tubular cast on, which if you're a visual learner, I think is a really useful tool just to give you sort of a concept of how it works. And then they go through 3 different ways of doing the cast on. And I use the provisional cast on method with the crochet hook and knitting 4 rows and folding it up on itself. If you look at the tutorial, this will make sense for you. I use that method, which is the one that was in the You Sold Us blog that I mentioned last week. And I haven't tried any of the other methods yet, but I think that with this website and the tools in this article in particular, I could try one of the other versions and see how it works. So if you haven't ever tried a tubular cast on, if you've been intimidated by it, then I would definitely go check out the Twist Collective article on it, and I will link that in the show notes for you this week. I really like Twist Collective. They put together some nice collections of designers and knitted pieces. I think it comes out maybe 4 times a year, maybe even more than that, I'm not sure. But before I used to only look at the knitwear in the online magazine, but now, or more recently, I've started reading the articles that they have. And they are always really well done and really informative, so I would definitely recommend that. They've had this one most recently that I looked at was called Taming the Tubular Cast On. But they also have had interesting articles about color dominance in color work, and they usually have a section called Swatch It, which will have 3 of the same, it will have 1 stitch pattern, so whether that's like a cable or a lace swatch, the same swatch in 3 different yarns. And so you really get a feeling for how your yarn choice can affect the finished project. And I always find that really interesting because a lot of times I have a particular yarn in mind for a project and I only swatch in that yarn. I don't try out multiple different types of yarn for a particular project. So that's just an interesting thing to look at, I think. So yes, that's sort of the continuation of the technique tip from last week. But now I have a couple of questions that were asked on the in the Ravelry group this week that I thought I would talk about this week. So, 2 of them I will save for future episodes, but I'll tell you what they are now. So Carrie, my friend who used to live in Stockholm, asks, could you talk about your sweater collection sometime? And she wants to know what have been my favorite sweaters to knit, and what are my favorite sweaters to wear, and yeah, if you could just see them. So I think that would be a fun thing to do for a sort of special episode, and I will probably save that for sometime soon, but a little bit in the future. So the next question came from Caroline in Oregon, and she asks, how do you lengthen the back of sweaters? So I had mentioned before last week for my Cybella pullover that I was going to have the back lengthened. I decided not to do that, though. I don't really know why I decided not to do it, but I just liked how it was looking with the same length. I will lengthen the upper part of that sweater in the back so that the back neck sits higher than the front neck. Just like, I mean, you can tell in this dress that I'm wearing now, or just in any shirt, that the back is higher than the front, right? The front fabric, if it went all the way across, would end here, and the back fabric ends here, and if you were looking from the side, like, that's a different vertical distance. And if you lengthen the back of your sweater compared to the front, then you can avoid this, like, riding up on your neck situation, which is uncomfortable and makes sweaters not fit well. So the way that I do that is with short rows, and I did have one episode, I think, that I spoke about short rows in regards to my tunic that I made. I was calling it the Sparrow tunic for my mom, and I had done short rows for the bottom hem to create a nice shirt tail hem, which is what I was thinking of doing for the Cybella pullover, but I changed my mind. But that similar technique of using short rows I will use for the upper back. Basically what it is instead of working around like you do in pullover that's worked in the round, instead of working all the way around all the stitches, you work over half of the stitches back and forth a couple of times that's just what short rows are. Instead of working all the way around, you're doing a shortened version and working back and forth over just that part before you then continue to work all the way in the round. And that can make it so you have more rows of stitches in one place where you decide where you want it to be. In my case, it would be at the back neck or at the hem. You have more rows on one side of the fabric than on the other side of the fabric. So in this case, it would be on the back versus the front. So if you actually counted the number of rows on the back of the sweater versus the number of rows on the front of the sweater, there would be more rows on the back. And this is sort of another question that I'll save a bit more for when I'm closer to that part in my sweater, and I will have some diagrams to show you what I do specifically with the short rows. But if you're interested, you can take a look back at the episode that I was talking about that Sparrow, the modifications I did for the Sparrow tunic. I see. It could have been maybe back in episode 17, 18, 19, somewhere around there. But yeah, I'm not sure exactly where it is, but I will have some more information about short rows and using them in sweaters when I get to that point in my sweater. Okay, so Nikki from New Zealand asks, do you find the heels of socks with the fish lips kiss heel wear as well as those with a heel flap? So she said that she's knit lots of socks with heel flaps and has never tried the fish lips kiss heel but would like to give it a try. And I actually knit a lot of socks for my mom, not for myself. And she wears them in shoes, and eventually they get pretty worn, but I think she still wears the first pair of socks that I ever knit her. And so I think if you have, if you don't just have one pair of knitted socks, you have a little bit of variety in, that you're like rotating these socks through, that helps the wear, because you're not wearing one over and over and over, which would maybe result in a hole. But I have never had a problem specifically at the heel with socks wearing through. I tend not to wear mine with shoes very often unless it's really cold. Just because since I don't wear them all the time in my boots or something, a lot of times my shoes don't quite fit with the extra thickness of the hand knit socks if I bought the shoes and tried them on with normal socks, if that makes sense. I usually wear my socks around the house, so it doesn't really matter what I have on the back of my heel in terms of wear. I have worn and used some socks, though, with the Fish Lips Kiss Heel, and I know my mom has too, even though she might not know it, but I don't think that they necessarily wear too much differently. Of course, having a slip stitch heel, or I have partridge heel, where it's the heel flap, and you have a little bit of texture and difference in thickness there with the slip stitches. I think that does help even create a little extra padding, which could be nice, but I really do like the fit of the Fish Lips Kiss Heel, so sometimes maybe it's worth it, especially if you have a couple pairs of socks rotating through your wardrobe. So, thanks for the question, Nikki. And Lynette from the UK asks, can you knit without looking? Do you have any tips? And I remember from reading her question, that's not the whole question, but she was talking about how she has taught herself to knit continental because she's a crocheter and already held the yarn in her left hand. But she would like to know how to knit without looking. And yes, I do knit without looking. It's something that I actually wanted to learn pretty much right after I started knitting, so that I could continue to knit while I had to read for school, like reading textbooks. Now sometimes I read on my Kindle, and I'm sure I'll have to start reading textbooks again this week. Next week, hopefully. And I also watch podcasts or movies and things, and I am therefore knitting without looking because I'm paying attention to other things. I think that some tips that I could give you would be to first start out by just knitting something in stockinette. I don't knit lace without looking, or cables. But still, you could work on a project with cables, and you just have to be willing to look down and do part of it looking, which is fine. But my suggestion would be to first start out with something in stockinette and just see if you can do one stitch without looking. Just look away. Then do 2 stitches, then do 3 stitches, then do 5 stitches. Keep going and see if you can just do them. And I would first recommend starting out by either closing your eyes or just looking away. Maybe if you're holding your knitting, looking slightly above your knitting so that you can maybe see part of it in your peripheral vision, just as sort of baby steps. But then eventually, just do it. Just look away and knit without looking. So I'm knitting right now. I'm looking at the camera, not at my yarn. I could look away. I think another tip that I could give you mostly is first to focus on something else. Or focus on nothing else while you're knitting. So I mean, by closing your eyes or looking away, but not looking at a podcast or not trying to read directly without looking, because if you can look away or close your eyes and keep knitting, and get comfortable with that, which I think you will find pretty quickly that you actually do have all the muscle memory and your hands know how to do it and feel the stitches and make the stitches. Once you can do that comfortably, then it will be easier to transition over into doing something else while you're knitting, like reading or watching podcasts or movies. So I hope those suggestions help, and really I think at some point it just turns into you have to trust yourself that you know how to make the stitches, and just do it. Kind of like riding a bike or something, you know. At some point you just have to take off your training wheels and go for it. And really, if you're doing it over just some stockinette and you have a small amount of stitches on the needles or whatever, just do a small amount of stitches at a time, look back and see if any of them need fixing. If not, just keep going, but otherwise it's not such a big deal if you mess up. I would recommend knitting on something that you usually work on. So if you always knit socks, first try knitting socks without looking. Don't switch to using huge needles and big yarn just because you're trying to do it without looking or something. Do something that you're comfortable knitting and that you do all the time, because that's what will be most in your hands and in your muscle memory. So let me know how that goes, and if anybody else has tips for how to learn to knit without looking, then I would love if you would comment in the Ravelry group or in the YouTube comments below. So finally, I actually already recorded this second half, but then it disappeared off my iPad, so I can't exactly remember what I already said, but I do remember that I wanted to talk first about this handmade knitter's soap, which I received from Deb with my bag order, and it's a solid soap that's used for wool wash, and I haven't given it a try yet, but I definitely will soon and let you know. That's the first time that I've had a solid soap for washing hand knits. Usually I use Soak or Eucalyptus, but I'm definitely interested to give that a try. So she sent that, and it is the Thai scent, which smells lovely and spicy. So, yeah. And then I also wanted to ask if anybody had any suggestions for a 3-color pattern. I'm automatically thinking shawl or wrap or something that uses these 3 colors. And this is the Brooklyn Tweed Loft. Like I was saying before, I tried the hat for Mina, but it's really just didn't work in this yarn, and so I need a springier, bouncier yarn. But I've loved knitting it so much because I love this yarn, even if it didn't work for this project. But it reminded me that I would like to knit with this more. I do have 50 grams of each of these colors. This not right here, but Fossil I have, which is this nice slightly off-white color. I have the rest of the 50 grams of this in a hat that I don't wear, so I want to take that out and use it for this project that will happen sometime soon. Then I have this, which is Wood Smoke, and this is a nice oatmeal-y color. And I also have the rest of this skein in a different hat that I don't wear. And then I have the 50 grams of Button Jar, which is this one, and I have some more of this in the other hat that this is with, which I don't wear. So I'm going to rip those out, and then I'm thinking some 3-color wrap shawl thing would be lovely. I have 275 times 3 yards of these colors total, and that is so I yeah, let me know if you have any suggestions of something that this could be good for. I don't really want to do a color affection shawl, so anything but that. Let me know what you think. So that is just about it for this week. I do expect to be able to release the Meristem Mittens pattern later this week, if not already, and I will be sure to announce that on Instagram, and of course I'll announce it next week on the podcast when it's ready. But until then, I am hoping to knit on some more of my sweater and get that up to the armholes, maybe finished. No, probably not. But yeah, I look forward to talking to you again next week, and happy knitting. Bye!